Recording by Nicole Lee. Centuries of Meditations by Thomas Traherne. Introduction. This book is dedicated to A.T. Quiller Couch, with feelings of much admiration for his talents as poet, novelist and critic, and of deep gratitude for his perhaps too favourable estimate of the literary labours of the editor. Introduction. It is now 4 years since it fell to my lot to make known to the world the poems of Thomas Traherne. For considerably more than 2 centuries they had remained in manuscript, unknown and uncared for. They had fallen into my hands by what I must needs think was a very remarkable series of accidents, and I account it as one of the most fortunate incidents of my life that I immediately discerned their value and importance. When I published them, I did not fear to express my belief that they were the work of one of the finest and noblest spirits that ever existed, and it was a great gratification to me that my own estimate of Traherne was accepted as a true one by all competent judges. I do not think that anyone whose opinions are worth consideration would now deny that this successor of George Herbert and contemporary of Milton, Crashaw and Vaughan is worthy to be mentioned in the same breath with them, or if indeed anyone should think that Traherne's poems, fine as they are in substance, are yet, owing to the occasional defects of expression, inferior to those of the poets I have named, I cannot doubt that with the publication of the present volume, all question as to his claim to rank with them in force of intellect and power of expression must be finally set at rest. When I published the poems, I prefixed to them an introduction, in which I gave all the facts about the author's life and works which I had then been able to discover. I need not travel again over this ground, since most of my present readers will have seen the previous volume. What I said in that preface, I do not now see any reason to modify or withdraw. About the present work there is much to be said, and I at first intended to attempt to say all that needed saying. But after some endeavour to do this, I came to see that with all my admiration for Traherne as a literary artist, I was so far out of sympathy with many of his ideas that I could not deal with them from the proper standpoint without exposing myself to some risk of misapprehension. Though it is certainly not necessary that anyone who writes about Traherne should believe all that he did, it is yet desirable that he should be generally in sympathy with the faith of which our author was so earnest a professor. For myself, then, all I now propose to do is, firstly, to make some remarks on the characteristics of Traherne as a man and an author, and secondly, to endeavour to bring out, by comparison with the most famous work of the same kind, the peculiar merits of his Centuries of Meditations. In the character of Traherne, the qualities of the poet, the mystic, and the saint are all to be found in a very high degree, if not indeed in their highest manifestations. And these qualities were also happily combined in him, that they make up together a perfect unity. He was not more a poet than a mystic, nor more a mystic than a saint, but each at all times, and never one rather than the other. To set out to prove this is not perhaps very necessary, since few or none who study attentively this and the former volume will be likely to question it. But I cannot resist the temptation of making some relative quotations from an author who, though utterly different, as it may seem at first, from Traherne, had yet not a few qualities in common with him. The writer of The City of Dreadful Night, though he did not and could not know anything of Traherne, has yet in his essay called Open Secret Societies, in describing the typical characteristics of the poet, the mystic, and the saint, produced a living picture of our splendid alien, as he has been called. Let me quote first Thomson's description of the poet. There is the open secret society of the poets. These are they who feel that the universe is one mighty harmony of beauty and joy, and who are continually listening to the rhythms and cadences of the eternal music whose orchestra comprises all things from the shells to the stars, all beings from the worm to man, all sounds from the voice of the little bird to the voice of the great ocean, and who are able partially to reproduce these rhythms and cadences in the language of men. In all these imitative songs of theirs is a latent undertone, in which the whole infinite harmony of the whole lies furled, and the fine ears catch this undertone, and convey it to the soul, wherein the furled music unfurls to its primordial infinity, expanding with rapturous pulses, and agitating with awful thunders this soul which has been skull-bound, so that it is dissolved and borne away beyond consciousness, and becomes as a living wave in a shoreless ocean. If, however, these their poems be read silently in books, instead of being heard chanted by the human voice, then, for the eye which has vision, and underlight stirs and quickens among the letters, which grow translucent and throb with light, and this mysterious splendour entering by the eyes into the soul fills it with spheric illumination, and like the mysterious music swells to infinity, consuming with quick fire all the bonds and dungeon walls of the soul, dazing it out of consciousness, and dissolving it in a shoreless ocean of light. That this passage might very well stand for a particular description of Traherne's character as a poet can, I think, hardly be disputed. If ever man felt that the universe is one mighty harmony of beauty and joy, that man was most certainly Traherne. In all his writing, save his Roman forgeries, his continual endeavour, conscious or unconscious, was to reproduce the rhythms and cadences of the eternal music. That he did not entirely succeed in this endeavour, but sometimes stammered or sang only in broken accents, is but to say that in striving to utter things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme, he failed where all must fail, until the Superman is evolved, or the human race invents a new medium of expression. In a passage no less applicable to Traherne, Thomson describes the saints. There's the open secret society of the saints. In how many books, in how many lovely lives have their mysteries been published? Yet how dark and unintelligible is their simplest vernacular to the learned as to the ignorant, to the learned even more than to the ignorant, who are not of the society. These are they who know and live up to the knowledge that love is the one supreme duty and good, that love is wisdom and purity and valour and peace, and that its infinite sorrow is infinitely better than the world's richest joy. From Thomson's delineation of the mystics I quote the following passage, though it is much too short to give an adequate idea of the manner in which the whole description applies to Traherne. Lastly, there is the open secret society of the mystics. These are the very flower and crown of the four already touched upon, saints of saints, heroes of heroes, philosophers of philosophers, poets of poets, the identity of the masculine ideal of hero and philosopher, and the feminine ideal of poet and saint. Their mysteries have been published to all the world in the choicest visions and actions, thoughts and strophes, of the choicest members of these other fraternities. Yet not only do they remain utterly obscure and illegible to the common world of men, they are dark to all of even those fraternities who have not been initiated to the supreme degree. There is much more in this remarkable essay that I should like to quote, but I must restrict myself to one other passage, in which Thomson enunciates a truth which Traherne was the first, I think, distinctly to apprehend, and which he was never tired of enforcing. Such are a few of the loftiest open secret societies, these organizations of nature so perfect and enduring, so superior to the most subtle organizations elaborated by man. And in all of them, I think, we find that the poor and the mean and the ignorant and the simple have their part no less, nay, have their part even more, than the rich and the great and the learned and the clever. Let us praise the impartiality of our Mother Nature, the most venerable, the ever young, the fountain of true democracy, the generous enunciator of true liberty and equality and fraternity, who bestoweth on all her children alike all things most necessary to true health and wealth, the sunshine, the air, the water, the fruits of the earth, and opens to rich and poor alike the golden doors of enfranchisement and initiation into the mysteries of heroism, purity, wisdom, beauty, and infinite love. To no man who ever lived were these mysteries more open than to Traherne, and no man was ever more constantly in communion with them. It has been said that most men have only enough religion to make them hate one another, and it is at least certain that in the past religion has more often been the cause of strife and division among mankind than of love and concord. But Traherne at least knew well and acted up to the knowledge that love is the one supreme duty and good, that love is wisdom and purity and valour and peace, and that its infinite sorrow is infinitely better than the world's richest joy. The love of love filled him and possessed him, guided his every action, and ruled all his thoughts. He lived habitually on the highest levels of spiritual life, without any of those ignoble descents to the depths of sensualism, which in men compounded, as most of us are, more of sense than spirit, too often follow hard upon our moods of exaltation. In writing his latest work, it is plain that Traherne's design, after he had proceeded a little way in it, was to produce a manual of devotion suitable for the members of the Church of England, and more particularly for the less learned and cultivated adherents of it. He probably thought that none of the then existing manuals were altogether fitted for their purpose. When he began, it was doubtless without any thought of imitating or rivalling the best known of all treatises of the kind, the Imitation of Christ. But before he had got to the end of his first century, he must have seen that his work was resolving itself into a somewhat similar production. He must have been well acquainted with the Imitation, since he makes at least one quotation from it, but it can hardly be doubted that he thought it was too exclusively Romanist in its tone and teaching to be fit for use by members of the English Church. Certainly he might justly have thought so, for with all its merits, that work, if regarded as a manual for general use, and not merely for the cloister, has at least one serious defect. Instead of pointing out that defect myself, since it might be thought that I am not in this case an impartial judge, I will quote two passages from writers who cannot reasonably be accused of having any undue bias against the book. At first I will quote from the Rev. T. F. Dibdin's introduction to his fine edition of the Imitation. The Imitation is clearly the production of a writer deeply versed in Holy Writ, but it is also the production of one who has applied that knowledge more exclusively to the purposes of private meditation, confession, and prayer. It is beyond all doubt a work of great singleness of heart and simplicity of character, but its cloistered author rarely appears to have raised his eyes through his grated window to contemplate a sun which was shining upon the good and the bad alike, or to have looked abroad and viewed his fellow creatures hastening in their several careers to perform those offices which Providence had destined them to fulfill. I will quote next a passage from the Quarterly Review for July 1895, which appears in an article entitled "The Passing of the Monk." Monastic Christianity finds its most complete expression in that small manual of devotion put forth in the 15th century, known as The Imitation of Christ. Its boundless popularity reminds us, said Dean Milman, that it supplies some imperious want in the Christianity of mankind, but like monasticism, of which it is the perfect exponent, it is absolutely and entirely selfish in its aims as in its acts. Its sole, single, exclusive object is the purification, the elevation of the individual soul, of the man absolutely isolated from his kind, with no fears, no sympathies, and no hopes of our common nature. He has absolutely withdrawn himself not only from the cares, the sins, the trials, but from the duties, the moral and religious fate of the world. It may be thought at first that I have quoted these passages without any sufficient justification, but I think it will be seen directly that they are entirely relevant and even illuminating. The Imitation, as Dean Milman so well says, represents the spirit of the cloister, and, shall we add, of a narrow and rigid Catholicism. The Centuries of Meditations represents, in comparison at least, the spirit of free religious thought. In the Imitation we behold the doubts, fears, and perplexities of a soul oppressed by the consciousness of real or imaginary sins. In the Centuries, the rapturous aspirings of a joyful and happy soul, conscious of its kinship with God himself, and sure of its own divinity and of its glorious destiny. The author of the Imitation wanted to save his own soul. Traherne wanted to save the world. However much assured he might have been of his own salvation, the latter writer would never have been content merely with that. He desired with an exceeding great desire to make all men as happy as himself. All were immortal creatures, and it was within the power of all to make their peace with God, and enter into their great inheritance. This is the continual burden of his verse, and the message which informs his prose with its fire of conviction and its unmatched persuasiveness. He would have rejected with scorn any faith whose benefits were to be confined to himself, or to a narrow circle of the elect. It was a matter of the deepest sorrow to him that men should be so indifferent to those things which to himself seemed to be the only objects worthy of thought. He could not even conceive that God himself could be content or happy, while men rebelled against his ordinances, or rejected his offered love. Perhaps some readers may think that it is unfair to bring the two writers, whose aims were so different, thus into seeming antagonism. My object, however, as I have explained, is not to disparage the Imitation, but merely to bring out as strongly as I can, by comparison with it, the particular merits of the Centuries. I certainly do not wish to displace the former from its position as a devotional classic. All I desire is to show that the Centuries is well worthy to take its place beside it. Bearing this in mind, the reader, I hope, will not refuse to follow me, while I continue and complete the parallel between the two works. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Thus, quoting the words of Christ as the Imitation begin. The writer therein declares his object to be the setting up of a light, whereby the life of man may be guided and ruled, in accordance with the will of God. That also was Traherne's object in writing his Centuries of Meditations. Had he deemed that the Imitation satisfactorily fulfilled its avowed purpose, he would not have thought it was necessary to write another work of the same kind, for he could not have failed to see that his Centuries must inevitably be brought into comparison with it. Perhaps he did not at first realize this, but it must soon have become apparent to him. Both writers, according to their lights, were earnestly intent upon fulfilling the will of God, but how different is the spirit in which they write. Traherne dwells continually upon the goodness, the love, and the mercy of God, whom we are to love in return for his love to us. The God of the author of the Imitation is a hard taskmaster, who is to be feared rather than loved. Is it necessary that I should prove this statement? I think not. But if I am asked for chapter and verse in support of my contention, I do not believe I shall have any difficulty in producing them. Where, however, we find the greatest difference between the two writers is in their attitude towards that nature and human nature, which the author of the Imitation seems consciously, or unconsciously, to have thought of as things separate and apart from himself, things not to delight and rejoice in, but to be avoided and shunned as much as might be, whereas to Traherne they were, after God himself, the great fountains of his happiness and the source of his enjoyments. It seems necessary to support such a statement as this by producing sufficient evidence to justify it. Therefore I will now quote some parallel passages which do, as I conceive, display this radical and profound difference between the two writers, and I will first quote a very characteristic passage from the 20th chapter of the Imitation. 7. In solitude and silence the devout soul advances with speedy steps, and learns the hidden truths of the oracles of God. There she finds the fountain of tears, in which she bathes and purifies herself every night. There she riseth to a more intimate union with her Creator, in proportion as she leaves the darkness, impurity, and tumult of the world. To him who withdraws himself from his friends and acquaintance, to seek after God, will God draw near with his holy angels. It is better for a man to live in a corner so he have a regard for himself, than, neglecting that one thing needful, to go abroad and even work miracles. It is highly commendable in all that are devoted to a religious life, to go seldom abroad, to shun being seen of men, and to be as little fond of seeing them. 8. Why shouldst thou desire to see that which thou hast not permission to enjoy? For the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. Our sensual appetites continually prompt us to range abroad, but when the hour of wandering is over, what do we bring home but remorse of conscience, and weariness and dissipation of spirit? A joyful going out is often succeeded by a sad return, and a merry evening often brings forth a sorrowful morning. Thus all carnal joy enters delightfully, but ere it departs, bites and kills. 9. What canst thou see anywhere else which thou canst not see in thy retirement? Behold the heavens, the earth, and all the elements, for out of those were all things made. What canst thou see there, or anywhere, that will continue long under the sun? Thou hopest perhaps to subdue desire by the power of enjoyment, but thou wilt find it impossible for the eye to be satisfied with seeing, or the ear to be filled with hearing. If all visible nature could pass in review before thee, what would it be but a vain vision? Of this passage all I will say is that I believe it could have been written only by one who was shut up within the walls of a monastery, and whose ideas and interests were bounded by its walls. Now let us listen to the voice of one whose sympathies knew no narrow limitations, whose interest in things human was only less than his interest in things divine, and within whose veins the pulse of the universe never ceased to throb with the fullest current of intense vitality. 28. Your enjoyment of the world is never right till every morning you awake in heaven, see yourself in your Father's palace, and look upon the skies, the earth, and the air as celestial joys, having such a reverend esteem of all, as if you were among the angels. The bride of a monarch in her husband's chamber hath no such causes of delight as you. 29. You never enjoy the world aright, till the sea itself floweth in your veins, till you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars, and perceive yourself to be the sole heir of the whole world, and more than so, because men are in it, who are every one sole heirs as well as you, till you can sing and rejoice and delight in God, as misers do in gold and kings in sceptres. You never enjoy the world. 30. Till your spirit filleth the whole world, and the stars are your jewels, till you are as familiar with the ways of God in all ages, as with your walk and table, till you are intimately acquainted with that shady nothing out of which the world was made, till you love men so as to desire their happiness with a thirst equal to the zeal of your own, till you delight in God for being good to all, you never enjoy the world. Till you more feel it than your private estate, and are more present in the hemisphere, considering the glories and the beauties there, than in your own house, till you remember how lately you were made, and how wonderful it was when you came into it, and more rejoice in the palace of your glory, than if it had been made but today morning. 31. Yet further, you never enjoy the world aright, till you so love the beauty of enjoying it, that you are covetous and earnest to persuade others to enjoy it, and so perfectly hate the abominable corruption of men in despising it, that you had rather suffer the flames of hell than willingly be guilty of their error. There is so much blindness and ingratitude and damned folly in it. The world is a mirror of infinite beauty, yet no man sees it. It is a temple of majesty, yet no man regards it. It is a region of light and peace, did not men disquiet it. It is the paradise of God. It is more to man since he is fallen than it was before. It is the place of angels and the gate of heaven. When Jacob awaked out of his dream, he said, God is here, and I wist it not. How dreadful is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and the gate of heaven. Are any words of mine needed in order to make clear how vastly different were the ideas and opinions of the writers of those typical passages? Surely not. But possibly some readers may think that the passages I have chosen from the Imitation do not fairly represent its general spirit. Well, let such readers judge for themselves. It will be an easy and profitable task for them to go carefully through the two books, comparing them for themselves. For myself, I will say, whatever risks I may thereby run, of being accused of undue partiality or want of critical insight, that I believe the comparison will nowhere be found disadvantageous to Traherne, while it will be in many points much in his favour. I could easily prove this by quoting other parallel passages, but I will not further pursue the subject. I can well imagine that some readers to whom the Imitation has been endeared by long use, and who have derived much spiritual benefit from it, will not be pleased at the manner in which I have spoken of it, but I hope they will not on that account refuse to make themselves acquainted with Traherne's Meditations, since it is not he who is responsible for what is said herein. Of Traherne's theological opinions, and of the soundness or otherwise of his teaching, I must, as I have intimated, leave others to speak. My own interest is rather in the man himself than in his beliefs. The latter he shared with many dull and uninspired theologians of his time, though with the difference that his was a living and burning faith, while theirs was a matter of custom and convention. It is hardly possible that anyone can now believe in the Christian faith as it was then understood, as Traherne and his contemporaries believed in it, but this I think matters not, or matters very little. It is not at all necessary to believe as Milton believed in order to appreciate Paradise Lost, nor is it any more necessary to subscribe to the doctrines of Christianity as Traherne subscribed to them in order to derive much spiritual benefit from the centuries. Notwithstanding the fervour of the author's faith in his creed, it is noteworthy that there is much in his work which is not distinctively Christian, and which may be accepted by men of all shades of opinion. This is not to say that there is anything in the book which is contrary to the Christian faith, but only that there is much besides in it. It might indeed be fitted by omission only for the use of members of any creed or sect, nor will theists or even pantheists fail to find much in it with which they will be in thorough agreement or complete sympathy. None, in short, save those who are so firmly wedded to their own narrow creed that they can see nothing good in anything outside it, can fail to find in the centuries guidance, refreshment, and inspiration for their spiritual life. The books which render such services are few in number, and few of those few are so little alloyed with matter of inferior worth, or of questionable tendency, as the centuries. There are, I suppose, hardly any books in which a serious and thoughtful reader cannot discover some blemish, though it may be one which only slightly affects their worth or usefulness. Nor is the present work free from one such blemish, or at least what appears to me to be one. There is a passage in it which to all, or nearly all readers of the present day, will seem entirely repellent, and entirely at variance with the general spirit of the work. I wish indeed I could have omitted it, and I would have done so, could I have reconciled the act to my conscience. But Traherne, like Cromwell, is too great to need to have his blemishes concealed. So great was his sense of the necessity of faith in God and in the Christian doctrines, that he thought no punishment could be too great for those who, as he judged, wilfully rejected the means of salvation. This was pardonable enough, since it was the frame of mind in which most believers of his time regarded the sins of heresy or unbelief. But Traherne went a step further even than this. It was a sensation no less of grief than of astonishment that filled me when I first came upon the following passage in the 1st century, number 48. They that look into hell here may avoid it hereafter. They that refuse to look into hell upon earth, to consider the manner of the torments of the damned, shall be forced in hell to see all the earth, and remember the felicities which they had when they were living. Hell itself is a part of God's kingdom, to wit, his prison. It is fitly mentioned in the enjoyment of the world, and is itself by the happy enjoyed, as a part of the world. That Traherne should have believed in a material hell can be, of course, no matter of surprise, though we may regret that he was not, in that respect, in advance of his time, but that he should actually have thought that the knowledge that countless multitudes were suffering eternal torments would add to the enjoyment of the blessed, for I cannot see that his words will bear any other construction, is, I must needs think, much to be lamented. It is true that the thought did not originate with Traherne, and that others before and since his time have entertained it, but that one so enlightened as he should have held so inhuman a belief is surely a thing to be deeply regretted. So much I have felt bound to say, for I hold, as I think most men, whatever their religious opinions may be, now hold, that any belief which shocks our sense of humanity must necessarily be false. Better not believe in God at all than believe him to be a cruel and unforgiving tyrant. But that was not unhappily the general opinion until long after Traherne's time, and I suppose that even now there are some few zealots who believe in predestination and eternal punishment. That it is not now possible for any good man to think or write as Traherne thought and wrote in the passage I have quoted, is at any rate a proof that humanity since his time has gone forward a long way upon the path of enlightenment. Of our authors and literary artists much might be said, and it was my first intention to dwell at considerable length upon this aspect of his work. This, however, I will not now attempt to do, except in the merest outline. A good many critics, judging only from the specimen extract from the Centuries and Christian Ethics, which I quoted in the introduction to the poems, have expressed the opinion that Traherne was a greater master of prose than of verse, and it must, I think, be confessed that his prose is free from some defects with which his verse may be fairly charged. His prose style, it seems to me, was entirely his own, for I know of no model which he could have followed or imitated. Certainly it was not the usual style of his own time, or of the Elizabethan period. It has not the least resemblance to the style of Milton, of Jeremy Taylor, or of Sir Thomas Browne. Nor was it, I think, the result of any conscious effort on the author's part to distinguish himself as a master of style. He wrote clearly, strongly, and beautifully because his mind was full of his subject, and he had a most earnest desire to impart to others those truths which he himself fervently believed, and which he was convinced that all must believe who would attain the life of blessedness. It was said of Robespierre, I think, that this man will go far, for he believes every word he says. Whether that was true of him I do not know, but assuredly it might have been truly said of Traherne. Whatever the worth of his ideas may be, it is certain that he fervently believed in them, and therefore his words still pulsate with vital force, and still glow with the warmth of conviction. This utter sincerity of thought, though it is not indeed the only requisite for a great writer, is yet, I think, the one indispensable quality without which all others are useless. With it, and with little else, Bunyan produces a work which, in the universality of its appeal, is almost without a rival. Without it, how many works full of learning, eloquence, and 100 other good qualities have fallen into entire oblivion? No toil of the brain, no effort of will, no learning or study, could ever have produced such a passage as the following, had there not been in the author's soul a fire of conviction, which gave life and heat to his conceptions, as they issued in rapid succession from the forge of thought. You are as prone to love as the sun is to shine, it being the most natural and delightful employment of the soul of man, without which you are dark and miserable. Consider therefore the extent of love, its vigour and excellency. For certainly he that delights not in love makes vain the universe, and is of necessity to himself the greatest burden. The whole world ministers to you as the theatre of your love. It sustains you in all objects that you may continue to love them, without which it were better for you to have no being. Life without objects is sensible emptiness, and that is a greater misery than death or nothing. Objects without love are the delusion of life. The objects of love are its greatest treasures, and without love it is impossible they should be treasures. For the objects which we love are the pleasing objects and delightful things, and whatsoever is not pleasing and delightful to you can be no treasure, nay, it is distasteful and worse, since we had rather it should have no being. Is there any passage in prose or verse in which the praise of love is chanted more eloquently or more convincingly than it is chanted here? Did even Shelley in his Epipsychidion eulogize it with more power of expression or greater force of persuasiveness? Yet if we analyze the passage we shall find that it is made up of simple and common words, put together seemingly without art or contrivance, and with no attempt to do anything save to write down as rapidly as might be the thoughts that surged through the author's brain and imperatively demanded utterance. Throughout the work, indeed, the author, it appears to me, was writing at high pressure, urged on by a belief that he had a duty to perform, which perhaps he feared that death might prevent him from accomplishing. Shall we say even that there is some trace of feverishness, or of the over-excitement of the enthusiast in his work? Possibly it may be so. But Traherne's enthusiasm was the source of his power, and the motive force of his spirit. It was not in his nature to balance between two opinions, or act upon motives of expediency. A positive faith, admitting of no doubts or misgivings, was a necessity of his existence. It was easier for him to understand how men could be absolute unbelievers, than how they could be mere indifferent conformists. I am almost tempted to assert that he was the truest Christian that ever lived, by which I mean that he was the one who believed most entirely in the faith, and ruled his conduct most strictly in accordance with its precepts. Of course this may be disputed by all those Christians who are not members of the Church of England, but all who look to the essentials of the faith, and disregard the minor differences of its various sects, will, I am sure, allow that a more perfect Christian than Traherne could not be. Nor has the Church, I firmly believe, ever had an advocate whose life and whose works could plead more eloquently in its favour than the life and the works of the author of Centuries of Meditations. Here I must end. I am well aware how lamely and how imperfectly I have dealt with my theme. Perhaps I should have entrusted the task to some more competent and sympathetic hand, but I preferred to try how far it was possible for me, whose opinions differ so widely from Traherne's, to do justice to so fine a spirit and so admirable a writer. Whether I have altogether failed I do not know, but if I have, it will matter little. It is not by any words of another that Traherne will be finally judged. If his own words still have the fire of life in them, as I firmly believe they have, they will carry their message to the ears of those fitted to receive it during many coming generations. May I not say indeed, even as long as the language of Shakespeare and Milton endures. Note: a friend who has been kind enough to look over the proof sheets of this book thinks that I have somewhat misapprehended the author's meaning in my comments upon the passage in which Traherne, as I understand him, seems to assert that the happiness of the blessed will be enhanced by the thought that others are suffering eternal torments. I should of course be very glad to find myself mistaken on this point, but at present I am unable to see that any meaning can be placed upon the last sentence of the passage which I have quoted, save that which I have indicated. Another friend, who has also seen the proof sheets of the introduction, is moved to protest against the statement of my opinion as to the unsuitability of the Imitation of Christ for the use of members of the Church of England. He has pointed out to me that ever since its first translation into the English language, it has been very largely used by members of the English Church, not only with the approval, but with the direct sanction of many of the leading authorities of the Anglican Communion. There are, he adds, not more than 2 or 3 passages in the Imitation which can possibly be regarded as contrary to the tenets of the English Church. I am a child in these matters, and I will not dispute these facts. After all, my argument was not so much directed to show that the Imitation was an unsuitable book for Protestant readers, as to point out that Traherne's work, having been written by one of the most zealous ministers of the English Church, is necessarily better suited for members of that Church and of the non-conformist churches than a work which was written by a Roman Catholic for Roman Catholics. But, as I have already said, I have no wish to disparage the Imitation. All I desire to do is to show that Traherne's Centuries is worthy to be placed beside it. End of introduction. Centuries of Meditations by Thomas Traherne, the First Century, Part 1. This book unto the friend of my best friend, as of the wisest love a mark I send, that she may write my Maker's praise therein, and make herself thereby a cherubim. 1. An empty book is like an infant soul, in which anything may be written. It is capable of all things, but containeth nothing. I have a mind to fill this with profitable wonders. And since love made you put it into my hands, I will fill it with those truths you love without knowing them, with those things which, if it be possible, shall shew my love to you in communicating most enriching truths, to truth in exalting her beauties in such a soul. 2. Do not wonder that I promise to fill it with those truths you love but know not, for though it be a maxim in the schools that there is no love of a thing unknown, yet I have found that things unknown have a secret influence on the soul, and like the scent of the earth unseen, violently attract it. We love we know not what, and therefore everything allures us. As iron at a distance is drawn by the lodestone, there being some invisible communications between them, so is there in us a world of love to somewhat, though we know not what in the world that should be. There are invisible ways of conveyance by which some great thing doth touch our souls, and by which we tend to it. Do you not feel yourself drawn by the expectation and desire of some great thing? 3. I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things that have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. Things strange yet common, incredible yet known, most high yet plain, infinitely profitable, but not esteemed. Is it not a great thing that you should be heir of the world? Is it not a great enriching verity, in which the fellowship of the mystery which from the beginning of the world hath been hid in God lies concealed? The thing hath been from the creation of the world, but hath not so been explained as that the interior beauty should be understood. It is my design, therefore, in such a plain manner to unfold it, that my friendship may appear in making you possessor of the whole world. 4. I will not by the noise of bloody wars and the dethroning of kings advance you to glory, but by the gentle ways of peace and love. As a deep friendship meditates and intends the deepest designs for the advancement of its objects, so doth it shew itself in choosing the sweetest and most delightful methods, whereby not to weary but please the person it desireth to advance. Where love administers physic, its tenderness is expressed in balms and cordials. It hateth corrosives, and is rich in its administrations. Even so, God, designing to show his love in exalting you, hath chosen the ways of ease and repose by which you should ascend. And I, after his similitude, will lead you into paths plain and familiar, where all envy, rapine, bloodshed, complaint, and malice shall be far removed, and nothing appear but contentment and thanksgiving. Yet shall the end be so glorious that angels durst not hope for so great a one till they had seen it. 5. The fellowship of the mystery that hath been hid in God since the creation is not only the contemplation of the work of his love in the redemption, though that is wonderful, but the end for which we are redeemed, a communion with him in all his glory. For which cause, St. Peter saith, the God of all grace hath called us unto his eternal glory by Jesus Christ. His eternal glory by the method of his divine wisdom being made ours, and our fruition of it the end for which our Saviour suffered. 6. True love, as it intendeth the greatest gifts, intendeth also the greatest benefits. It contenteth not itself in showing great things, unless it can make them greatly useful. For love greatly delighteth in seeing its object continually seated in the highest happiness. Unless therefore I could advance you higher by the uses of what I give, my love could not be satisfied in giving you the whole world. But because when you enjoy it you are advanced to the throne of God, and may see his love, I rest well pleased in bestowing it. It will make you to see your own greatness, the truth of the Scriptures, the amiableness of virtue, and the beauty of religion. It will enable you to contemn the world, and to overflow with praises. 7. To contemn the world and to enjoy the world are things contrary to each other. How then can we contemn the world, which we are born to enjoy? Truly there are two worlds. One was made by God, the other by men. That made by God was great and beautiful. Before the fall it was Adam's joy and the temple of his glory. That made by men is a babel of confusions, invented riches, pomps, and vanities, brought in by sin. Give all, saith Thomas à Kempis, for all. Leave the one, that you may enjoy the other. 8. What is more easy and sweet than meditation? Yet in this hath God commended his love, that by meditation it is enjoyed. As nothing is more easy than to think, so nothing is more difficult than to think well. The easiness of thinking we received from God, the difficulty of thinking well proceeded from ourselves. Yet in truth it is far more easy to think well than ill, because good thoughts be sweet and delightful. Evil thoughts are full of discontent and trouble, so that an evil habit and custom have made it difficult to think well, not nature. For by nature nothing is so difficult as to think amiss. 9. Is it not easy to conceive the world in your mind, to think the heavens fair, the sun glorious, the earth fruitful, the air pleasant, the sea profitable, and the giver bountiful? Yet these are the things which it is difficult to retain. For could we always be sensible of their use and value, we should be always delighted with their wealth and glory. 10. To think well is to serve God in the interior court, to have a mind composed of divine thoughts and set in frame, to be like him within. To conceive aright and to enjoy the world is to conceive the Holy Ghost, and to see his love, which is the mind of the Father. And this more pleaseth him than many worlds, could we create as fair and great as this. For when we are once acquainted with the world, you will find the goodness and wisdom of God so manifest therein, that it was impossible another or better should be made, which being made to be enjoyed, nothing can please or serve him more than the soul that enjoys it, for that soul doth accomplish the end of his desire in creating it. 11. Love is deeper than at first it can be thought. It never ceaseth, but in endless things. It ever multiplies. Its benefits and its designs are always infinite. Were you not holy, divine, and blessed in enjoying the world, I should not care so much to bestow it. But now in this you accomplish the end of your creation, and serve God best, and please him most. I rejoice in giving it. For to enable you to please God is the highest service a man can do you. It is to make you pleasing to the King of Heaven, that you may be the darling of his bosom. 12. Can you be holy without accomplishing the end for which you are created? Can you be divine unless you be holy? Can you accomplish the end for which you were created unless you be righteous? Can you then be righteous unless you be just in rendering to things their due esteem? All things were made to be yours, and you were made to prize them according to their value, which is your office and duty, the end for which you were created, and the means whereby you enjoy. The end for which you were created is that by prizing all that God hath done, you may enjoy yourself and him in blessedness. 13. To be holy is so zealously to desire, so vastly to esteem, and so earnestly to endeavour it, that we would not for millions of gold and silver decline nor fail nor mistake in a tittle. For then we please God when we are most like him. We are like him when our minds are in frame. Our minds are in frame when our thoughts are like his. And our thoughts are then like his when we have such conceptions of all objects as God hath, and prize all things according to their value. For God doth prize all things rightly, which is a key that opens into the very thoughts of his bosom. It seemeth arrogance to pretend to the knowledge of his secret thoughts. But how shall we have the mind of God unless we know his thoughts? Or how shall we be led by his divine Spirit till we have his mind? His thoughts are hidden, but he hath revealed unto us the hidden things of darkness. By his works and by his attributes we know his thoughts, and by thinking the same are divine and blessed. 14. When things are ours in their proper places, nothing is needful but prizing, to enjoy them. God therefore hath made it infinitely easy to enjoy, by making everything ours, and us able so easily to prize them. Everything is ours that serves us in its place. The sun serves us as much as is possible, and more than we could imagine. The clouds and stars minister unto us. The world surrounds us with beauty. The air refresheth us. The sea revives the earth and us. The earth itself is better than gold, because it produceth fruits and flowers. And therefore in the beginning was it made manifest to be mine, because Adam alone was made to enjoy it. By making one and not a multitude, God evidently shewed one alone to be the end of the world, and every one its enjoyer. For every one may enjoy it as much as he. 15. Such endless depths live in the divinity and in the wisdom of God, that as he maketh one, so he maketh every one the end of the world, and the supernumerary persons being enrichers of his inheritance. Adam and the world are both mine, and the posterity of Adam enrich it infinitely. Souls are God's jewels, every one of which is worth many worlds. They are his riches, because his image, and mine for that reason. So that I alone am the end of the world, angels and men being all mine. And if others are so, they are made to enjoy it for my further advancement. God only being the giver, and I the receiver. So that Seneca philosophized rightly when he said, Deus me dedit solum totum mundo, ad totum mundum mihi soli. God gave me alone to all the world, and all the world to me alone. 16. That all the world is yours, your very senses and the inclinations of your mind declare. The works of God manifest, his laws testify, and his word doth prove it. His attributes most sweetly make it evident. The powers of your soul confirm it. So that in the midst of such rich demonstrations you may infinitely delight in God as your Father, friend, and benefactor, in yourself as his heir, child, and bride, in the whole world as the gift and token of his love. Neither can anything but ignorance destroy your joys. For if you know yourself, or God, or the world, you must of necessity enjoy it. 17. To know God is life eternal. There must therefore some exceeding great thing be always attained in the knowledge of him. To know God is to know goodness. It is to see the beauty of infinite love, to see it attended with almighty power and eternal wisdom, and using both those in the magnifying of its object. It is to see the King of heaven and earth take infinite delight in giving, Whatever knowledge else you have of God, it is but superstition, which Plutarch rightly defineth to be an ignorant dread of his divine power, without any joy in his goodness. He is not an object of terror, but delight. To know him therefore as he is to frame the most beautiful idea in all worlds. He delighteth in our happiness more than we, and is of all other the most lovely object. An infinite Lord, who having all riches, honours, and pleasures in his own hand, is infinitely willing to give them unto me, which is the fairest idea that can be devised. 18. The world is not this little cottage of heaven and earth. Though this be fair, it is too small a gift. When God made the world, he made the heavens, and the heavens of heavens, and the angels, and the celestial powers. These also are parts of the world. So are all those infinite and eternal treasures that are to abide for ever, after the day of judgment. Neither are these some here and some there, but all everywhere, and at once to be enjoyed. The world is unknown till the value and glory of it is seen, till the beauty and the serviceableness of its parts is considered. When you enter into it, it is an illimited field of variety and beauty, where you may lose yourself in the multitude of wonders and delights. But it is an happy loss to lose oneself in admiration at one's own felicity, and to find God in exchange for oneself, which we then do when we see him in his gifts and adore his glory. 19. You never know yourself till you know more than your body. The image of God was not seated in the features of your face, but in the lineaments of your soul. In the knowledge of your powers, inclinations, and principles, the knowledge of yourself chiefly consisteth, which are so great that even to the most learned of men their greatness is incredible, and so divine that they are infinite in value. Alas, the world is but a little centre in comparison of you. Suppose it millions of miles from the earth to the heavens, and millions of millions above the stars, both here and over the heads of our antipodes. It is surrounded with infinite and eternal space, and like a gentleman's house to one that is travelling. It is a long time before you come unto it. You pass it in an instant, and leave it for ever. The omnipresence and eternity of God are your fellows and companions, and all that is in them ought to be made your familiar treasures. Your understanding comprehends the world like the dust of a balance, measures heaven with a span, and esteems 1,000 years but as one day, so that great, endless, eternal delights are only fit to be its enjoyments. 20. The laws of God, which are the commentaries of his works, shew them to be yours, because they teach you to love God with all your soul, and with all your might, whom if you love with all the endless powers of your soul, you will love him in himself, in his attributes, in his counsels, in all his works, in all his ways, and in every kind of thing wherein he appeareth. You will prize him, you will honour him, you will delight in him, you will ever desire to be with him, and to please him. For to love him includeth all this. You will feed with pleasure upon everything that is his, so that the world shall be a grand jewel of delight unto you, a very paradise and the gate of heaven. It is indeed the beautiful frontispiece of eternity, the temple of God and palace of his children. The laws of God discover all that is therein, to be created for your sake. For they command you to love all that is good, and when you see well, you enjoy what you love. They apply the endless powers of your soul to all their objects, and by 10,000 methods make everything to serve you. They command you to love all angels and men. They command all angels and men to love you. When you love them, they are your treasures. When they love you, to your great advantage, you are theirs. All things serve you for serving them whom you love, and of whom you are beloved. The entrance of his words giveth light to the simple. You are magnified among angels and men, enriched by them, and happy in them. 21. By the very right of your senses you enjoy the world. Is not the beauty of the hemisphere present to your eye? Doth not the glory of the sun pay tribute to your sight? Is not the vision of the world an amiable thing? Do not the stars shed influences to perfect the air? Is not that a marvellous body to breathe in, to visit the lungs, repair the spirits, revive the senses, cool the blood, fill the empty spaces between the earth and heavens, and yet give liberty to all objects? Prize these first, and you shall enjoy the residue: glory, dominion, power, wisdom, honour, angels, souls, kingdoms, ages. Be faithful in a little, and you shall be master over much. If you be not faithful in esteeming these, who shall put into your hands the true treasures? If you be negligent in prizing these, you will be negligent in prizing all. For there is a disease in him who despiseth present mercies, which till it be cured he can never be happy. He esteemeth nothing that he hath, but is ever gaping after more, which when he hath, he despiseth in like manner. Insatiableness is good, but not ingratitude. 22. It is of the nobility of man's soul that he is insatiable, for he hath a benefactor so prone to give, that he delighteth in us for asking. Do not your inclinations tell you that the world is yours? Do you not covet all? Do you not long to have it, to enjoy it, to overcome it? To what end do men gather riches, but to multiply more? Do they not, like Pyrrhus the king of Epire, add house to house and lands to lands, that they may get it all? It is storied of that prince, that having conceived a purpose to invade Italy, he sent for Cineas, a philosopher and the king's friend, to whom he communicated his design and desired his counsel. Cineas asked him to what purpose he invaded Italy. He said, to conquer it. And what will you do when you have conquered it? Go into France, said the king, and conquer that. And what will you do when you have conquered France? Conquer Germany. And what then, said the philosopher, conquer Spain. I perceive, said Cineas, you mean to conquer all the world. What will you do when you have conquered all? Why then, said the king, we will return and enjoy ourselves at quiet in our own land. So you may now, said the philosopher, without all this ado. Yet could he not divert him till he is ruined by the Romans? Thus men get £100 a year, that they may get another, and having two covet 8. And there is no end of all their labour, because the desire of their soul is insatiable. Like Alexander the Great, they must have all, and when they have got it all, be quiet. And may they not do all this before they begin? Nay, it would be well if they could be quiet. But if after all they shall be like the stars that are seated on high but have no rest, what gain they more but labour for their trouble? It was wittily feigned that that young man sat down and cried for more worlds to conquer. So insatiable is man that millions will not please him. They are no more than so many tennis balls, in comparison of the greatness and highness of his soul. 23. The noble inclination whereby man thirsteth after riches and dominion is his highest virtue, when rightly guided, and carries him as in a triumphant chariot to his sovereign happiness. Men are made miserable only by abusing it. Taking a false way to satisfy it, they pursue the wind, nay, labour in the very fire, and after all reap but vanity. Whereas as God's love, which is the fountain of all, did cost us nothing, so were all other things prepared by it to satisfy our inclinations in the best of manners, freely, without any cost of ours. Seeing therefore all satisfactions are near at hand, by going further we do but leave them, and wearing ourselves in a long way round about, like a blind man, forsake them. They are immediately near to the very gates of our senses. It becometh the bounty of God to prepare them freely, to make them glorious, and their enjoyment easy. For because his love is free, so are his treasures. He therefore that will despise them because he hath them, is marvellously irrational. The way to possess them is to esteem them, and the true way of reigning over them is to break the world all into parts, to examine them asunder. And if we find them so excellent, that better could not possibly be made, and so made they could not be more ours, to rejoice in all with pleasure, answerable to the merit of their goodness. We being then kings over the whole world, when we restore the pieces to their proper places, being perfectly pleased with the whole composure. This shall give you a thorough grounded contentment, far beyond what troublesome wars or conquests can acquire. 24. Is it not a sweet thing to have all covetousness and ambition satisfied, suspicion and infidelity removed, courage and joy infused? Yet is all this in the fruition of the world attained, for thereby God is seen in all his wisdom, power, goodness, and glory. 25. Your enjoyment of the world is never right, till ye so esteem it, that everything in it is more your treasure than a king's exchequer full of gold and silver, and that exchequer yours also in its place and service. Can you take too much joy in your Father's works? He is himself in everything. Some things are little on the outside, and rough and common, but I remember the time when the dust of the streets were as pleasing as gold to my infant eyes, and now they are more precious to the eye of reason. 26. The services of things and their excellencies are spiritual, being objects not of the eye, but of the mind, and you more spiritual by how much more you esteem them. Pigs eat acorns, but neither consider the sun that gave them life, nor the influences of the heavens by which they were nourished, nor the very root of the tree from whence they came. This being the work of angels, who in a wide and clear light see even the sea that gave them moisture, and feed upon that acorn spiritually, while they know the ends for which it was created, and feast upon all these as upon a world of joys within it, while to ignorant swine that eat the shell, it is an empty husk of no taste nor delightful savour. 27. You never enjoy the world aright, till you see how a sand exhibiteth the wisdom and power of God, and prize in everything the service which they do you, by manifesting his glory and goodness to your soul, far more than the visible beauty on their surface, or the material services they can do your body. Wine by its moisture quencheth my thirst, whether I consider it or no. But to see it flowing from his love, who gave it unto man, quencheth the thirst even of the holy angels. To consider it is to drink it spiritually. To rejoice in its diffusion is to be of a public mind. And to take pleasure in all the benefits it doth to all, is heavenly. For so they do in heaven. To do so is to be divine and good, and to imitate our infinite and eternal Father. 28. Your enjoyment of the world is never right, till every morning you awake in heaven, see yourself in your Father's palace, and look upon the skies, the earth, and the air as celestial joys, having such a reverent esteem of all, as if you were among the angels. The bride of a monarch, in her husband's chamber, hath no such causes of delight as you. 29. You never enjoy the world aright, till the sea itself floweth in your veins, till you are clothed with the heavens, and crowned with the stars, and perceive yourself to be the sole heir of the whole world, and more than so, because men are in it, who are every one sole heirs as well as you, till you can sing and rejoice and delight in God, as misers do in gold, and kings in sceptres. You never enjoy the world. 30. Till your spirit filleth the whole world, and the stars are your jewels, till you are as familiar with the ways of God in all ages as with your walk and table, till you are intimately acquainted with that shady nothing out of which the world was made, till you love men so as to desire their happiness, with a thirst equal to the zeal of your own, till you delight in God for being good to all, you never enjoy the world. Till you more feel it than your private estate, and are more present in the hemisphere, considering the glories and the beauties there, than in your own house, till you remember how lately you were made, and how wonderful it was when you came into it, and more rejoice in the palace of your glory, than if it had been made but to-day morning. 31. Yet further, you never enjoy the world aright, till you so love the beauty of enjoying it, that you are covetous and earnest to persuade others to enjoy it, and so perfectly hate the abominable corruption of men in despising it, that you had rather suffer the flames of hell than willingly be guilty of their error. There is so much blindness and ingratitude and damned folly in it. The world is a mirror of infinite beauty, yet no man sees it. It is a temple of majesty, yet no man regards it. It is a region of light and peace, did not men disquiet it. It is the paradise of God. It is more to man since he is fallen than it was before. It is the place of angels and the gate of heaven. When Jacob waked out of his dream, he said, God is here, and I wist it not. How dreadful is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and the gate of heaven. 32. Can any ingratitude be more damned than that which is fed by benefits, or folly greater than that which bereaveth us of infinite treasures? They despise them merely because they have them, and invent ways to make themselves miserable in the presence of riches. They study 1,000 new-fangled treasures which God never made, and then grieve and repine that they be not happy. They dote on their own works, and neglect God's, which are full of majesty, riches, and wisdom. And having fled away from them because they are solid, divine, and true, greedily pursuing tinselled vanities, they walk on in darkness, and will not understand. They do the works of darkness, and delight in the riches of the prince of darkness, and follow them till they come into eternal darkness. According to that of the psalmist, all the foundations of the earth are out of course. 33. The riches of darkness are those which men have made, during their ignorance of God Almighty's treasures, that lead us from the love of all to labour and contention, discontentment and vanity. The works of darkness are repining, envy, malice, covetousness, fraud, oppression, discontent, and violence, all which proceed from the corruption of men and their mistake in the choice of riches. For having refused those which God made, and taken to themselves treasures of their own, they invented scarce and rare, insufficient, hard to be gotten, little, movable, and useless treasures, yet as violently pursued them, as if they were the most necessary and excellent things in the whole world. And though they are all mad, yet having made a combination they seem wise, and it is a hard matter to persuade them either to truth or reason. There seemeth to be no way but theirs, whereas God knoweth they are as far out of the way of happiness as the east is from the west. For by this means they have let embroils and dissatisfactions into the world, and are ready to eat and devour one another, particular and feeble interests, false proprieties, insatiable longings, fraud, emulation, murmuring, and dissension being everywhere seen, theft and pride and danger and cozenage, envy and contention drowning the peace and beauty of nature, as waters cover the sea. Oh, how they are ready to sink always under the burden and cumber of devised wants! Verily, the prospect of their ugly errors is able to turn one's stomach, they are so hideous and deformed. End of the 1st century, Part 1.